Hi, I'm Jo from J.H.Leather and welcome to this make-along video. Now things are going to be a little bit different in this video in that we're not making just one design, but we are making 3 different designs in this video. So let's get started. So the first design that we're going to be going over is the wet mould. Now I'm still quite new to this, but I have made myself a mould on the Glowforge, and if you're interested in that, let me know and I will do a video on how I made it. Now as this mould is made from plywood, what I'm actually going to do is wrap it in cling film just to protect it from the water from the leather. Now the leather that I will be using for this is 1.5mm thick vegetable tan shoulder, which is finished, so I'm not going to have to apply any dye to it. Now what I'm going to do is start by cutting the opening shape at the top. And if you purchase the patterns, then this shape will be included on yours, so you're not going to have to mark it out like what I've done. Once I've marked that out, I am then going to cut out the opening. And then using a number 1 edge tool, I'm going to edge that opening on both the grain and the flesh. It's going to be easier now than when it is actually been moulded. And once I've done that, I can get my water. Now, you don't want to use boiling water. I know this is coming out of a kettle, but it is not boiling water. You want to be able to put your hand in it quite comfortably because you don't want to damage the leather. Once your water is at a suitable temperature, you can then pop your leather in. And now I actually saw this tip on the Leathercraft Masterclass page where Philip actually added some leather conditioner to the water, which is what I have done. And I've actually put that onto the leather as well, just to replenish the natural oils that the leather will lose over this process. And when you're happy and your leather has been in for 20 minutes or so, you can then take it out and pat it dry before starting to shape it over your mould. So I'm just going to start loosely shaping this, and then what I'm going to do is mark roughly where I can cut a little bit out of the corner to help shape that bottom edge around the bottom of the mould. And then once again, I'm going to put it back on to my mould and start to help shape it around. And when I'm happy, I can then put the top plate onto my mould. And once happy, I'm going to start clamping that down. Now I got a couple of sets of these mini G clamps which work really well for this, and you should be able to pick up something similar from your local hardware store and online. We're going to put these on all around the mould to make sure we clamp our leather down nice and flat. So you should have a little torture device looking a little bit like this. And what we're going to do is actually leave that to one side so that can dry naturally for at least a day. Now that our leather has dried, we can actually take that out of the mould. So we're going to remove all of the clamps and then the top plate. And now this has moulded really well, and I'm really pleased with it considering this is my second time at doing a wet moulding. And now what I'm going to do is mark on my trimmable areas. So I'm going to set my divider to 5mm and then draw around the 3 sides that I will be trimming. What I also like to do is actually then go over this with a ruler just to extend the lines down, which make it easier for cutting. Now at this point I had a bit of a brain fart in that although I marked 5mm around this case, I actually decided to cut it at 3mm. Now I'm not too sure why I decided to do that, because on my sample one I did that with 5mm and that came out really well. Now the case I still think does come together well, but in future, and if you are looking to do wet moulding yourself, I would leave at least a 5mm line from where your wet mould sort of shape begins to give you enough room for your edging and your crease line and your stitch line. So let's get back to the video. We can now edge around the outer grain side on our remaining 3 sides of our little pouch here. And then we can go over these with some stain and polish that in before going over it with our creasing iron. Next thing I'm going to do is mark out where I want my sand brown stud to be. So again, this is marked on your patterns, and I've actually included a little front sort of cutout piece which will help make this a bit easier for you. And I'm going to make sure that that is in the middle. And then punch the appropriate size hole for the sand brown stud. And then I can now fit that. Now a little tip with the sand brown stud, sometimes I will put a little bit of glue in there just to secure that screw. And we can now measure to cut out our backing piece. Now again, this is included in your patterns. However, if you have changed your design, all you have to do is just measure the width of the outer edges from what will be your front piece and then cut a strip that is that wide. So on the flap, I want some curved corners. So I'm going to use this 2p coin to mark those on. And then follow around that line with my knife. Before going over with my edger on both the grain and the flesh side. Now on the flesh side, you want to go from above the point where the front part of your case is going to finish, and then just go up and around the flap. We can then stain and polish the edges before going around them with our creaser. And then we're going to punch the hole on the flap for the sand brown stud. And I'm also going to cut a little line out here just to help that stud fit in without having to cut a hole that is monstrously big. And I'm just using a sharpened screwdriver for that. We can now start to attach our 2 pieces together. So we're going to apply glue to both the front and the back of our case. And once tacky, we can then stick the 2 pieces together. Once we've done that, we can then do our stitch marking. So you want to stitch mark in as close as you can to your case, or if you've left extra room, you can put that at about 3mm. And if you want, you can stitch mark all the way through at this point. Once we've done our stitch marking, we can now stitch our case together. And we're going to start with 2 back stitches and we'll finish with 1.5. Now a quick tip on this is that if you are using an awl, you want to use one with a longer blade so that the haft of the awl doesn't sort of damage the actual front part of the case, which is an issue I had on my original one where I used a shorter awl. Now it didn't like damage it as such, it just made some marks which I then had to get out with a bone folder. We can then trim our thread and start to do our finishing touches. So I'm going to use a bone folder here to flatten my stitches. And then I'm going to sand the edges so that they are nice and flush, before going over them with some more stain and repolishing the edges. And then I'm going to go around this with my creaser one more time to get a nice crisp line. So you can now pop your deck of cards in and you can start using the first of these 3 cases. So moving on to the second design, which is the cross stitch. Now you have a pattern for this if you chose to buy the pattern pack, but I haven't, so I'm going to cut and mark out what my leather shape will be. Again, I'm using 1.5mm leather here, and I'm going to mark out a similar opening on this one as I did on our wet mould. And this just gives you a finger hold when you're putting your cards in and out of the case. Once I've cut the opening out, what I'm going to do is mark where my groove lines are going to be. Now we have quite a few on this and they are shown on the patterns, and just make sure you don't draw a line all the way across on that last one. We can then set our dividers to the side width, which is 10mm. And then we can cut out the required pieces here. Now, like I said, you guys have the actual pattern for this, so it is all readily marked out for you. Once we have everything cut out, what we're going to do is do our stitch grooving. So this happens along both the long sides on those tab areas, as well as in the two central pieces. And that's going to help our leather fold around. We can then punch our hole for our sand brown stud before going over the opening with our number 1 stitch groove on both the flesh and the grain side. We can also do that around the flap area. We can then stain the edges of our case and polish them with a cloth before going over the edges with our creaser. Now, using our dividers, we can mark on our stitch line, and for this I'm actually using a pricking iron which has circular holes. We're going to punch that all the way through. Now, on the pattern there are holes marked for that, which you can do one at a time should you wish, or you can use a stitch marker of your choice. We can then encourage the sides to turn over before we start our stitching. Now we are going to be using 1 thread with 2 needles on, and we're going to start at the bottom with a double stitch. So you might need to watch this part of the video a few times just to see what I'm doing. So we're going to have the 1 stitch through them both, and then our double stitch is going to go through from one side and then down to the next hole to start making our crosses. So you can see there's going to be 2 stitches in that first hole area. Basically then go down and then across to the lower hole. And we do that up both sides. And you can see that I am leaving the thread loose here. Now that is important because we're going to actually tighten it all right at the end on both sides together. So you can see I'm missing one hole, sort of going down one and then straight across. And this is what's going to make our cross stitch. So once you've gone down one side, you can then go down the other side in the remaining sort of open holes, as it were. And you can start to see that our cross stitch pattern is starting to make more sense now. Now, once we've stitched right up to the top, what we're going to do is go along and tighten our threads. So I'm going to be using my scratch awl for this. I'm just going to pull the threads one at a time all the way up to the top to get them nice and tight. Now, we don't want them to be too tight that they actually pucker the leather. We want those sides to sit flush on each other, which is why I actually have my hand in the case. And we're going to do this on both sides. Now, when we get to the top, what we're going to do is actually finish the threads here. So we are going to have our threads nice and tight, and then we're going to do a sort of double stitch at the top to get our straight stitch in. So both threads are going to go into that hole, so there'll be a double stitch at the top here. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to tie our threads off on themselves on the inside of the case. So what we're going to do is put our thread through itself, so underneath that top stitch, and then through the loop that creates, we're going to go back through there with the needle, and that is going to create a nice little knot, and we can pull that nice and tight. And we're going to do that on both sides. So you can see I'm going under the thread with my needle, and then pulling that through, and then with the loop of thread that creates, pushing my needle back through there and pulling that tight. And I'm also pulling it off to the end so that the knot is out of the way. And that's going to hold our stitching nice and tight, and you can then trim these. Now for this I actually used a polyester thread, so what I'm going to do is actually melt the ends with a lighter, or you can use a thread zapper, and that's going to keep them nice and secure and out of the way. So that is our main case made up. So what we're going to do is just do the flap. Now again, your shape is all on the pattern, so you're not going to need to do this bit. However, if you wanted to follow the steps that I've done to this point, then you can get an idea as to how to make your own. And once again, I'm going to round the corners with a 2p and follow that with my knife. And then using my number 1 edge tool, I'm going to go over this area on both the grain and the flesh side, and then re-stain and polish the edges of my case before going around with a creasing iron. And then I'm going to punch the hole for the other side of my satin brown fitting, as well as the little slit with my sharpened screwdriver. And that is our second case all finished. So you can pop your deck of cards in and you can transport them around in style. Now moving on to the final design, the card box. Now you can see from this illustration how the reinforcements are going to work, and it will become clear properly later on in this video. So we are going to be using 2.5mm vegetable tan shoulder for this, and I'm actually going to cut out my reinforcements on my Glowforge because it's more accurate than what I can do, and because I have the machine I might as well use it. Once they're cut out, we're going to just sand off the charred edges before going over them with some stain and polishing them. And I'm now going to cut out the main body piece of leather for this card box, as well as a strip for the sides. And again, all sizes are included in the pattern pack. We're going to then cut the outer part of our side pieces, and that is the length from the line on these inner reinforcements down to the base. And we're going to want 2 of those. We're also going to nick the corners on the short edges, and we can then stain and polish the edges of that. For box stitching, I actually put my stitch line closer to the edge at about 2mm, and then I'm going to draw around the 3 sides that will be stitch marked. Now for box stitching, we are going to use 2 different stitch marks, and for the side pieces we're going to use a right-handed iron for this, so we can then stitch mark all the way around them. We don't want to stitch mark all the way through on these because we're going to be awling from the sides onto the front of our card box, and that will make more sense when we get onto the stitching part of this box. Once we've stitch marked those, we can actually then rough the edges of our reinforcement pieces up to that line that was marked on the patterns, because that bit is actually going to be seen. And we can then apply glue to both the reinforcement part and the outer part of the leather. And when tacky, we can stick the 2 pieces together, making sure that that reinforcement is in the centre of the outer leather. So now we have our side pieces prepped, we can now focus more on the actual main body. So I'm going to cut one end square and mark where our groove lines are going to be. And again, you have the pattern for this, and at this point I haven't made it yet, which is why I haven't got it in the video. You can then groove those 2 lines with your stitch groove. And once I've done that, I can cut my leather to length before applying some edge stain and polishing the edges. And I've also made a base piece for this, which again is in your patterns. We can then scruff up the leather on our reinforcements, ready for gluing. So once we've done that, we can now apply our glue to both the reinforcements pieces and the actual external leather pieces. And once that's gone tacky, we can start to assemble. So what I'm going to do is actually attach the 2 end pieces first, if that makes sense. So we're going to have the front and the back reinforcement attached first. And again, we want that in the center of our outer leather. And then our bottom piece can sit in the middle between the 2 of them. We can now mark for stitch marking, so we're going to hold our side piece into the outer leather and mark on that bottom corner. So we're going to mark both sides because we're not going to have a stitch around the corner. So we're going to hold that nice and tight and mark on the front and the bottom where that corner stitch sits. We only need to do this on one side because what we're going to do is use our set square to send that over to the other side. And again, using our dividers at 2mm here, we can mark on our stitch line and do that on both sides. Before going along with our left-handed or inverse stitching iron. And once we have done that, we can now start to do some assembling. So we can apply our glue to the main body and the sides. And when tacky, we can start to assemble. Now, this is a little bit fiddly to do, but what I like to do is attach the two side pieces first on one end. And when I am happy with where they sit, I'm going to fold the leather around and attach the other side piece, because I want to make sure that those sides are nicely aligned. And then once the sides are done, I can then start to look at the base and get that stuck down. Now, it might be that that looks a bit loose for the moment, but when we do our stitching, that will come good and attach in nicely to the rest of the case. And now what I've done is actually put some fillers in this. So I cut out some card size fillers on the Glowforge and put them in, and also use some elastic bands to hold everything together. And I'm now going to start stitching. So we are going to be awling from our side piece, so from our right-handed stitch markers, and we're going to come out at an angle in the stitch marks that are on the main body, which, as they are reversed, means that awl comes out in the right direction. So hopefully that makes sense, and the more you see in this video, hopefully the more it will make sense. And once we've done some pre-awling, we can now start to stitch. We're going to start with 2 back stitches. And now the stitching process is actually the same, so you don't need to change your technique or anything there. We're just stitching at an angle rather than straight through the leather. And if you are interested in doing more box work, please let me know, and if there is call for it, I will do a proper full video on how to create different boxes, which will be more in depth than this video. Once you've done your first couple of stitches, you can then pre-awl further down your sides. Now, when you do your awling right down to the bottom, we have to do something a bit different here. So we're going to awl the last hole as normal out onto that one side, and then we're going to awl the same hole but in the other direction onto the base. So when we get down there with our stitching, we're going to put our one needle through just onto the one side, and then the needle that is on the side piece is going to go through the same hole but come out on the bottom, and that is how we stitch around the corners. So again, as with some of the other parts of the video, you might need to rewatch this part of the video just to get your head around that, but the more you do it, the easier it will become, and it does make sense when you are doing it. So we can now pre-awl some more holes and then stitch those as well. And when you get to the end, remember to do your 2 back stitches. Now, because we can see both sides of this and the case doesn't have a front or a back, we can just leave our 2 stitches or our threads on either side and trim them off where they are. So once you have finished your stitching, you can then tap the threads with a hammer, and I've still got my filler in mind. Now, if you don't have a filler, you can put your deck of cards in. And so this is the bottom part of our card box finished. We're now going to make the lid. Now, again, you actually have the patterns for this, so I'm going to have to make mine as I go. I'm just making the 2 side pieces and trimming the corners on what will be the top of those before going around it with my dividers for my stitch line. And stitch marking all the way around with my right-handed irons. And now I'm going to make what will be the outer leather part for our lid. And we're going to groove those 2 inner lines with our stitch groove. And now I'm going to cut mine to size. And then we can go over with some stain and polish the edges. We can now start to stitch mark for our lid. And again, we're going to hold the end piece where it's going to be and mark where the last stitch crosses over on both the sides and the base. And we can draw a line between those and follow that with our left-handed stitching iron. And we can now apply some glue to both the side pieces and the top. And now what I'm going to do is actually hold that onto the card box. Going to make things a bit easier because this lid hasn't got any reinforcements in it. And I'm going to fold the leather around the side pieces. Now, I probably should have waited a little bit longer for my glue to go off at this point. As you can see, it's still quite wet. And then what I'm going to do is put an elastic band around the whole lot to make sure that that stays in place. And we can now do our stitching as we did on the main body. So I'm going to start with 2 back stitches, falling from what will be the side of our case to the outer part of it. And in that corner, falling from both directions so we can get our thread to cross over nicely when we get onto the top part of this piece. And once we've done our awling, we can then stitch all the way around. When you're done and finish your stitching, you can then tap the threads down. And you can see we are now looking pretty good here. And we're going to do our finishing touches. So I'm going to reapply stain to the edges. And then polish that with a rag. And also on this, you can use a bone folder as well to get those edges nice and polished. And you can also use some crepe rubber to remove any excess glue if needed. And then you can put your cards in and get using your new card box. So that is it for this video and how to create these 3 different designs. Now I'd love to know which one is your favourite, so please leave a comment down below. And for me, I am really torn between them. I very much like the wet moulded one as well as the box one. And I can't pick between them. I really just like both of them. So yeah, please let me know which ones you like the most and which one you are looking forward to making if you go on and choose to download the pattern pack. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please click that thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more videos and tutorials. And I shall see you in the next video. Hi, I'm Skylar from J.H.Leather. And in this video, I'm gonna look grumpy. Oh, look at all this dog hair. Oh, God, it's everywhere. I'm meant to be presentable, I failed to reach that at the best of times. End.